Good evening, everybody. My name is still Steve Tinney, and I am the Deputy Director of the museum, still. Many thanks to all of you for coming to tonight's installment of our annual Greats Lectures. This year, of course, our theme is Great Stuff, something we have a lot of in the museum, and we're looking at a whole range of aspects of that topic, including, for example, in the next lecture, where we keep our stuff, the museum itself, which is, of course, a fantastic historic building. That lecture is entitled A Home for Our Stuff, Building the Penn Museum, and it will be presented on January the 2nd by Anne Brownlee, Associate Curator in the Mediterranean section. Some of you will know Anne and her great expertise in this topic. I regret to say that I will not be here to introduce on the 2nd, but I will be back. As usual, after the lecture, there'll be time for questions, which will be moderated by our speaker. There'll be a microphone going the round so everyone can hear the questions as well as the answers. And so to our speaker. Lynn Grant has been head conservator at the Penn Museum since July 2008. She received her degree in archaeological conservation from the Institute of Archaeology, University of London, in England in 1985, and a BA in classical studies in 1976. Ms. Grant joined the University of Pennsylvania Museum's Conservation Laboratory in 1988, 3 years before I got here, as conservator for loans and traveling exhibits. Prior to that, she had worked as a conservator in Canada, England, and Hong Kong, and done on-site field conservation in Italy, Greece, Turkey, and Jordan. Ms. Grant is a professional associate of the American Institute for Conservation. Since coming to the museum, she has worked summer field seasons the excavations at Troy, Turkey, from 1990 to 94, and participated in the museum's excavation seasons at Copan, Honduras, from 1995 to 2002. She is the author of The Maya Vase Conservation Project, a book about ceramics conservation at the Penn Museum. Within the museum, it is impossible to overestimate Lynn's importance, for we have about 1 million objects, and it is Lynn's job to oversee the conservation of all of them. No pressure. Lynn played a crucial role in the development of our Middle East galleries, triaging the conservation needs and formulating a plan which enabled the galleries to open on time by deferring some conservation. Currently, Lynn is a core member of the Ancient Egypt and Nubia Galleries team, where her detailed knowledge and understanding of the many architectural pieces that are being put together for those galleries is fundamental to creating a successful and installable design. In addition, many of you may be quite familiar with Lynn and several other members of the Conservation Department because of their duties in our working conservation gallery, the Artifact Lab, and also from blog posts by Lynn and others on her team. We have learned a lot from a huge amount of positive feedback from you, the public, that you love this stuff. So it was with really great pleasure that I will ask you now to welcome Lynn as she presents The Stuff You Do Not See, Conservation for a Renovated Museum.
Thank you, Steve. So I was given this title in August this summer, and it was like, oh, that's pretty existential. What am I supposed to talk about? But it also came at a time that was sort of a crisis point for me, because it seemed no matter where I went, on campus, in New York City, talking to friends across the nation, all I heard was people saying, oh, we're so upset that we can't go see the Sphinx. Why is the Sphinx gallery closed? You know, oh, my niece is just heartbroken. She's there for summer camp and she can't see the Sphinx. And I will tell you, I am the Grinch who stole the Sphinx. In that, I'm the person who asked the museum's executive team to close the gallery earlier than was necessary for the renovation of the space. But I'm going to talk to you today about some of the things that have gone on in the last 5 years and give you an idea of why the Sphinx is off limits for now. Come on. I can do that. So this is the Sphinx, you know, he's on a staycation, and it has upset many people. We've had people writing little notes to the Sphinx to let us know how much they miss him. But I'm going to go back a little before the summer of 2018, in fact, to the museum's strategic plan that was issued in 2013. And an excerpt from that plan says, a second major initiative of our strategic plan is the complete redevelopment and reinstallation of the Upper and Lower Egypt galleries, the iconic Rotunda, and the Near East galleries. So, you know, just a small undertaking. What is it, 75,000 square, or 75% of the whole museum is going to be renovated. So, makes a nice cover, makes a nice quote, but how do you get it done? By going forward, not backwards. So Steve mentioned about conservation treatments. Most of the time when we're treating artifacts in the museum, we're getting them ready to go on exhibit. So they're either going into exhibitions in our museum, or we also do a lot of work on materials that go on loan to other museums. So what that means is that a lot of the materials that have been on exhibit for a long time haven't necessarily been looked at. When I started here with Ginny Green, who's in the audience, in 1988, there were 2 conservators. Million artifacts, 2 conservators. So we weren't doing a lot of upkeep in the galleries. We did, in 2009, institute a program where every Monday when the museum is closed, we have 2 technicians who go around. They clean all the objects that are on open exhibit, and they examine all the objects and look for any signs of instability and report back to us. So we did have some idea of things that were going on in the galleries, but I hate to say it, when you're working hard to meet a deadline, there are times when a month will have gone by and I haven't been upstairs in the galleries. So in 2013, as part of the implementing the strategic plan, Dr. Siggers asked me to come up with a list of the objects on exhibit that needed conservation or needed some sort of intervention. And some of these were pretty easy. If you have a Buddhist silk painting with sunlight falling on it, the answer is easy. We took it down. So the theme of this talk, instead of the things that I'm going to be putting on exhibit, it's the things I'm taking off exhibit, but for their own good. There were also galleries that had been up for a very long time. Most of these around 50 years old, and their infrastructure was failing. The ceilings of the Egyptian tombs were falling into the Egyptian tombs, which is perhaps a bit more realism than we were really going for. The Islamic gallery with these wonderful windows, those were actually canted out from the wall so that there was nothing supporting them. And we sent 2 others from the same collection out on loan and discovered that the stained glass is actually held in place by stucco. So essentially thick spackle. And they were sort of starting to buckle. So we thought, oh, we've got to get those off. And the giant Benin case, the finest in 1960s design, was a death trap waiting to happen. Giant panes of untempered glass. And so, we'll put those on the list. And then there were 3 very large artifacts that were showing signs of instability in the galleries. One were these 2 Buddhist murals. There's just one represented here. They were actually, every time they cleaned underneath them, they would find little powdered bits of mud plaster. And the tomb chapel wall of Capara looked pretty happy, but if you looked at close range, the weight of the upper courses was actually starting, or had been for 92 years, crushing the lower courses. So these are all things that I identified as things that we wanted to sort of work on. And so, you know, how do you eat a gorilla? One bite at a time. And so one of the first things we started working on was we got a grant from the Carpenter Foundation and Michael and Winnie Fong, and we started a condition survey. Anytime you want to work on any object, the first thing you do as a conservator is create a ground state record of what it's like at that point. What's wrong with it? What does it need? All of those sorts of things. And so these murals are enormous, as you can see by the figures with scale. And so we got high-resolution digital images taken of every inch of it, and then we had two interns go through and annotate the pictures with different layers, showing all the condition problems in that one particular panel. And as you see, there were a lot of condition issues. And so we were going to use this information to inform a grant to get the money to do the treatment. Because any of these large conservation projects, we essentially have to, we can't do it with our regular staff. We have to hire people to come in and do it as a project basis. So we were at that stage when the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania, who had been talking about knocking down Penn Tower and putting up a new building for at least a decade that I know of, said, it's really going to happen, and it's going to happen soon. And it's like, that's interesting. So this is Penn Tower. It's about 20 feet from our foundation, and they wanted to demolish it and then dig down 2 stories through bedrock and put up a new, larger building, which there's a rendering. Here's our poor little rotunda, totally eclipsed. And it was like, wow, okay, you're going to do that starting next year. What do we have to do? So the first thing we did is do a total vibration survey. We'd known from some other instances that nearby construction projects can cause vibration. And the museum is made up of 7 different buildings. Waves propagate in very strange ways. And so we actually hired a special consultant from Columbia University who came in and really studied what effect the building of the new patient pavilion at the hospital was going to have. And then we went through every gallery, looked at every artifact, and said, okay, is this going to be impacted? What can we do? Can we make it safe? If we can't make it safe, we have to take it off. So some of the things, we just had to improve the mounts. And some of the things, there's actually now shock absorbers under the camels so that they no longer walk across the deck when it vibrates. And then we put in vibration monitors in strategic places that once the destruction and construction began, those will go off if the vibration reaches a certain level. They phone us, and in some cases, if it's high enough above a certain threshold, they would actually stop construction until they figured out what was wrong and get it fixed. You can imagine how popular that was. So in the course of doing this, our survey of the objects on exhibit came into play pretty quickly. First, I don't really have any images for this, but I will mention that our Egyptian storerooms were perhaps 40 feet from the excavation pit. They had not been renovated since the 1950s, probably. Were way overcrowded, wooden shelves, sagging metal shelves, and the vibration monitors just kind of went off the things. So we ended up, funded by the hospital, moving our entire Egyptian storage collection off-site. So we thought we had to move 42,000 items in 18 months, and son of a gun, turns out there were 50,000 of the little deer, but we still got it done in 18 months. But at the same time that was in process, we had to look at the galleries and start making the galleries safe. So with the Islamic gallery, we just decided we couldn't make that gallery safe. It was immediately adjacent to the shared wall, and the materials were just too vulnerable. So we deinstalled them and closed the gallery. So that was the first time I was a villain. Then we have the Tomb Chapel of Khafra, which some of you may remember seeing on exhibition. There are actually two parts of it. One part of it went on the road in 1996 as part of a traveling exhibition, and has been in storage since 2000 because we never really had the wherewithal to bring it back and put it up. So there was just the remaining wall, and thanks to the work that we'd done in 1996, we knew that it couldn't sustain vibration. The original, I use the term politely, wooden armature was essentially constructed out of butt ends of lumber, is the only polite way to say it. They were sistered and brothered and grandfathered and really not doing much of anything. So the whole thing was just kind of there balancing precariously. So we decided it had to come down to be made safe before the construction project. To do that, we hired two conservators to work on Triage for the vibration mitigation project. And they went through, you'll be hearing this a lot, they went through, they studied the condition, they looked at the places that were going to be causing problems, and they figured out what they had to do to make it safe. So one of the things they do is this sort of white snow material that's on a lot of the surface is actually a wax. The technical term for it is a volatile binding media, VBM. And what it is it's a wax that you can put on a surface. It strengthens the surface temporarily, and then it evaporates, leaving no trace. So it's very good for temporary stabilization of things. And we just needed this stable enough that we could do the rigging. And before I started working here, I wasn't really familiar with the term rigging. Rigging is people who move large, heavy items using cranes and chains and things. And this is not what you want to have happen. Or if any of you saw this in the news last weekend, this is Purdue University. They were lifting that clock face into place, and it just let go, fell, hit the two guys in the basket. Neither of them were hurt, thank God, and then hit the ground. And as one of my colleagues said, it was sort of like the cartoon, you know, where you see the watch spring going, spoing, 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 spoing. So we use art riggers who are much more careful than that. And really, really skilled, used to moving artworks. They have specialized techniques and materials. But when you get right down to it, if they're going to move something heavy, they have to touch it. And they have to touch it with strong things, like straps. They have to use chain hoists that have chains on them. They have to do all of those things. And so by having wonderful art riggers that we can trust, and by knowing what's involved in the process, we can figure out exactly how to prepare the artifacts before we start rigging. So that's why we went through and put the cyclododecane, which is the spray wax, on the surface. But it doesn't last that long, and especially when it's hot, as it often is in our galleries. And so, it was this fine timing between getting the cyclododecane on in time for the riggers to come in and then move it, and then have it, not go away. So, but on December 2015, we started removing the tomb chapel wall of Kapara. And this is always sort of an adventure in discovery. There are never any plans that show you how this went together in the first place. So a lot of it is like, okay, a giant game of Jenga. If I move this piece, what's going to happen? But gradually, because we had really good people, we got everything down and face up, and were able to get it all nicely settled away in its own specialized enclosure, because then we had to turn to our next challenge. We had essentially 1 year from the time we started this process until they told us they were going to start taking down the Penn Tower. So we had an external deadline that we really didn't have a lot of choice about. So the next challenge were these two monumental mud plaster Buddhist murals that have graced our rotunda since 1929. And lovely pieces. By and large, they're in pretty good shape. They do have some condition issues. I mentioned that the bottom parts were tending to flake and sift down on the floor. But, they'd been okay for 90 years, or 88 years, I guess, at that point. But we didn't know what was holding them up. No records. They're flat, they're against a curved wall, so we could guess that there was something behind them, but we didn't know what it was. So one of our keepers dangled off a lift with his smart camera and took a picture down, and it was like, okay, I'm not really sure what that shows. So the next thing was to cut a little hole in the base and have people squeeze through that little hole and get into this very thin space between the back of the mural and the front of the rotunda to see what was holding it up. And the answer was more wood. It was actually better carpentered than the wood for Kapara, but it was still not something that you wanted to be exposed to a lot of vibration, because life is like this. This is also the wall closest to the construction project. So, okay, we have to take down the murals. Oh yeah, the one thing we did find behind the murals, dirt. Lots and lots and lots of dirt. So again, our triage conservators, using the survey that had been done in 2014, completely serendipitously, went through and went over the whole mural, stabilized it. Areas where they were afraid that the material was not going to survive rigging, they put a facing on, so adhering a piece of non-woven fabric over the area that would essentially be a Band-Aid to hold it all in place, because the original material of these murals is mud plaster, which is just what it sounds like. It's mud and clay mixed with rice straw, spread out on a wall, and then they put a light ground of kaolin or something similar on, and then painted. And we knew that they'd been taken off the wall in the monastery in China in the early 20th century, but we didn't have really any indication of what was holding them up now. Were they still just mud plaster or whatever? We did find out that there is actually, in most cases, plaster of Paris between them. They went from China to an atelier in Paris, owned by the famous art dealer C.T. Liu, and he reassembled them into saleable bits and then spread them across the country. So once we got the facing done, we started lifting each piece one by one. Our rigger had to make a special frame to go behind each. And it was a long, careful process. And it's always true that these things happen at the worst possible time. This was June and July of 2016. It gets really hot in the rotunda. And as I said, it was really dirty. And if you're up 20 feet in the air, it's even hotter. So it was a long, drawn-out process. And when the last piece came down, we were all incredibly happy. So that was the rotunda. Okay, they started taking down Penn Tower. And we thought, oh, this is great. We've got a little bit of breathing room. When it was time for the museum's renovation project to start. And as I hope most of you know, we're in a major renovation of our Cox and Harrison wings. It's going to be wonderful when it's done. We're going to have air conditioning in our galleries. We're going to have more bathrooms. We're going to have more elevators. And they're going to be beautiful. And it's all going to be wonderful. But that summer, they broke the news to me that everything was going to have to come out of Lower Egypt for the renovation to happen. All the objects in Lower Egypt. And that's a lot of stuff, including the Sphinx. And then said, oh no, it's okay. You don't have to move the Sphinx, but everything else has to go. And again, it's a mystery. The one thing we really know about the 1926 installation of the Egyptian galleries in the Cox Wing is that it didn't go as planned. There was a miscommunication between the architect and the museum director about what's a second floor and what's a third floor. And as a result, this beautiful high-ceilinged gallery, which had been built to install these soaring architectural pieces from the Palace complex at Memphis, didn't have a strong enough floor to support them. The lower gallery, which had 400 pounds per square foot, loading, excellent, but it had pretty stumpy ceilings. And so instead of these wonderful soaring columns and pylons, you got the top of one column sitting beside its bottom. So I don't know how many of you ever realized when you went into the lower Egyptian galleries that those were half-height columns. And they've been half-height since 1926. And the museum has been trying to figure out how to get them to full height since then. And now we have a plan. But the plan required everything to come out because they have to install tie rods across the lower gallery to make the floors strong enough on the upper gallery. And there was a lot of monumental artifacts in the lower Egyptian gallery. This is just a quick total of all the things that had to be moved. And what makes it really just the kind of challenge you want to get up and face every morning, there is no information. We had no records of how they'd been installed. We had no records of how much they weighed. We have no records of what was holding them together. Nothing. And so trying to figure out how you can move them safely and move them out of the museum was a process that took a lot of planning. And I'm very fortunate that we had a great team working on this. So, but not only did we have to do all of that, but then we were going to have to conserve these objects so that they could go back up at full height. And we didn't really have a good idea how we were going to do that, but we knew that they were not in good condition and that we were going to need to treat them. And there are at least 12 of them that will not fit out of the building. Okay? They won't go in the freight elevators. You can't build a giant ramp. and move them. And so, it's okay. This is a new challenge, but we can do it. So we have to figure out how we're going to get them out of the building. And incidentally, even if we don't have to take them out of the building, we have to get them from the second floor to the third floor. So there's been a lot of brainstorming, and we started out looking at, with phase one of the construction, they had to build some temporary construction structures. And so we had to move some artifacts for that. So we used that to try and figure out what we were looking at. How hard is this going to be? So this was one of our guinea pigs. And it's this doorway that was against the wall. It was much harder to get apart than anybody had anticipated. As you see, after a while, everybody was just down on their hands and knees. And I do not normally, this is probably not a picture you'll see in a lot of museums where somebody is actually taking a chainsaw to the object. He's only working on the wooden armature, and because I trust him, I was able to not have a complete heart attack while he was doing this. But it gave us a real feeling for what we were up against. So, sort of deep breathing, just going through the motions. So we started looking at each piece carefully, again, documenting the current condition, trying to figure out how many pieces something was in, how much of it was original, how much was not, all that. So while we were doing that part of the thing, we were also starting to treat some of the objects so that, because we knew we had to bring riggers in to move them, so we wanted to essentially rigor-proof them. And then we documented all of that. So you see this, places where there might have been dangers of flaking. We used an adhesive and held them in place, and then we documented everything we did, all of that. In the time, so this was 2 years since we did Capara, the magic wax, the spray wax that we'd used, had increased 10 times in price and also become essentially unavailable. So we had to start looking for a substitute. And enough of the large pieces were sort of on the borderline, okay, if it weighs more than this, we can't move it. If it weighs less than this, we can. And trying to get these guys, they won't step on a scale. And our usual rough measurement is you sort of figure out roughly the volume of the thing, use the known density of the stone, and get an approximate weight. And doing that for many years, we're often out by a factor of like 10 or 15%, but it's always on the, it doesn't weigh quite that much. The one piece that I did this for early on, we had estimated it at 10,000 pounds, which was a little tricky because our elevator was rated for 10,000 pounds. And then it turned out that our elevator failed its weight test at 7,500 pounds. And so we were really happy when we actually could weigh the piece after we'd rigged it, and it only weighed 6,800 pounds. So we knew that we needed to get really accurate guesstimates on the weight. And if you wait long enough, technology comes along to rescue you. We had all of the artifacts scanned with a three-dimensional scanner, and through the magic of algorithms, they were able to figure out the exact, or very close to the exact, cubic measurements, cubic volume of the stone. There are tables that tell you what limestone is supposed to be. We've discovered that our Egyptian limestone is much less dense than these tables give you, but we did have some knowns that we could extrapolate from. So we were able to put together this whole table of exactly how much things weigh, what their floor loading requirement is, what kind of footprint they have, all those sorts of things, so that we could present that information to the riggers who could then plan how they could work on these objects. And finally, we'd gotten all the information we could, and it was time. It was July 9th, 2018, and it was time to start rigging. And so it was a long, hot summer. This is one of the first pieces we worked on. The top segment of it is all restoration, and so we sadly sawed it apart so that we could get it apart. Again, I would not normally encourage somebody to stand on top of one of our artifacts, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do. So we managed to get the first column down, and yay! Then starting on this column, which is red granite, Egyptian, the top piece that you see coming off there was a reproduction. And so, again, they wanted to take the reproduction off, so they were just dealing with the real thing. And while they were in the process up there, they leaned over and touched the column, and it moved. I don't know how many of you remember this piece in the gallery, but you can see it's in the gallery. It had a little base beside it. It's right by the Sphinx. It's been resting there comfortably for 92 years. There is a break here, clear across at this point. And so one of the questions was, okay, what's holding the two pieces together? Well, nothing. Not a thing. That 7,000-pound hunk of stone was balanced 10 feet in the air, just resting on the bottom part. There were no pins, no adhesive, no mortars, no nothing. So we just sort of gave thanks that nobody had been killed by it earlier and made plans to do better next time. Yeah, I think you can see the look on my face when it's like, huh. So yeah, there it is. So just to give you the idea of the whole thing. And yeah, we, in a meeting today, discussed how we were going to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So, and the 1926 installers of the Cox galleries were endlessly inventive. They used a different system for everything. And every time we thought, okay, we've done a doorway before, we know how this is going to go. Well, no. They reinvented the wheel every darn time. And they used whatever they had at hand. So there are bricks, there's wood, there was slate. I think there were like 5 or 6 different kinds of bricks. Our Center for the Analysis of Archaeological Materials brick collection was greatly enhanced by this project. But we gradually went through and were able to get everything down. One of the great mysteries of the Sphinx is what's holding it up. And so we took the sides off and discovered, again, not much. Those are railway ties. And it's just, you know, cribbing sitting there with absolutely no diagonal reinforcement whatsoever. So the whole thing could have just kind of gone at some point if anybody had ever, for instance, backed a forklift into it. So we didn't do that. So, but gradually we whittled away at the gallery, deinstalling the pieces, moving them to the side, then moving them again because they were in the way, and then moving them again because they were in the way. It was a vast sort of process of rearranging the furniture constantly. When the furniture weighs, one of my colleagues calculated at the end of the process, which lasted 7 weeks, that we moved 250 tons of stone. And so here it is, before we started, after we finished. And you can see all of the column pieces ranked up along the sides there. There's actually still one doorway there because it's the last doorway we worked on, and they had to save something really special for the last one. They cemented it to the brick wall. And getting it detached from the brick wall was a large effort. So then what did we do with it? Because remember, we have to take everything out of the gallery. So everything that was small enough to move, we moved. And so here you can see them packed up and braced for their trip out of the museum. We got an off-site storage location because there isn't a lot of spare space in the museum. And then we trucked them out, and I think it was something like 17 truckloads of stone that we moved to our off-site location. And it was, a challenge. And just because, why make it easy? When they took down the Penn Tower, they took away our loading dock access. So we had no loading dock. So they built us a new temporary loading dock. It was made of scaffolding. And then just as we were starting this project, they said, oh, by the way, we have to take away the temporary loading dock because we need that space. And so we were supposed to be getting all of these objects out of the museum before we lost our loading dock. So pressure, that's okay. So in the meantime, we'd been shopping for a new space. We found this lovely warehouse in an undisclosed location, about 50 minutes from the museum. It was really hard to find a rental property with 40-foot ceilings. But the Facilities and Real Estate Services at Penn managed it. And so starting in the day after Labor Day, we started moving things out there. And because of the loading dock issues, we essentially, the space had only finished being renovated like the week before. So we just left everything on pallets in the middle of the floor, and we're gradually getting them onto proper storage racks. But at least they're out of the building and they're safe. And why did we need 40-foot ceilings, you might ask? Well, this is the kind of thing that we're going to be doing out there. We have a lot of these stone pieces that we need to reassemble into large architectural elements. And so we need to be able to pick them up and stand them on their ends, figure out how they go together, move them around. So we bought our own lovely gantry, and we can use that in this space. And one of our first projects, remember the wall of the tomb chapel that I said went traveling and then went in storage in 2000? This was at the end of October. For the first time in 18 years, we got it back together so that we could see how it goes together. And we're going to use that to inform the planning for the new Egyptian galleries. So what about the stuff that stayed in the gallery? Things that were either too big to move or connected to things that were too big to move. So our current plan is that we're essentially using the gallery space as a giant conservation lab. We are going to spend the next 6 to 12 months working on all of these objects, making them ready to go on exhibit. And then when the construction is ready to start, we will move them all to one end of the gallery, and the construction team can work on the other side of the gallery, and then we'll shift them all over, and they'll do the same on the other side of the gallery. And then when they're ready to move them upstairs, we're working on that. We've got a couple plans. One of them involves opening a hole in the floor, but we'll see. Come back next year. And that sort of brings up, for so long we've just been concentrating on Okay, got to get them down, got to get them down. Now we've got them down. Now we have to figure out what we're doing with them. And that means putting them back to their original height. Now, this was how high it was in the gallery. This was one piece, that piece was sitting beside it. This was one piece, that was sitting beside it. To get them re-erected to their full height is going to be a design challenge with our exhibition designers, our structural engineers, our building engineers, God, everybody. So we're working on it. And that leaves the elephant in the room, or the Sphinx, as we like to call him. All through this time, I've been saying, well, at least we don't have to move the Sphinx. And then people come and say, well, how are you getting the Sphinx to the third floor? We don't have to get the Sphinx to the third floor. We're not moving the Sphinx, not moving the Sphinx. So that was great, because the Sphinx was actually, in many ways, the gallery was built around it. In 1926, when they built the gallery, they left this giant door in the east end, and that's how they brought the Sphinx in. And then once he was in, they closed up the wall. And then 50 years later, somebody built an entire building on the other side of that wall, so we can't use that space anymore. So how are we going to, they can't ask me to move the Sphinx. There's no way to get it out. Well, they asked us to move the Sphinx. This, I'm not going to tell you where we're taking it. I will tell you that these photographs from 1924 give you some hints. And we will expect to do that sometime either in late spring or early summer. And we have a plan. So stay tuned for news on where the Sphinx is going as part of his staycation. So I've used I a lot here. Everything that we did was a team. I've been at this museum for over 30 years. And in addition to the collections, the people who work here are absolutely unbelievably, incredibly wonderful people. And I say that even though most of them aren't here tonight. But just everybody has been involved in this, and it's been too many people to thank properly. But I will do a shout out to the core team who've been working on this. And yes, I did pick the least flattering photograph of everybody. And the other thing, people I wanted to acknowledge and thank are the great thing about my job, the thing that makes me happiest here in the museum, is that I get to sort of reach out and make contact with the anonymous craftsmen and artists who made all these fabulous artifacts, and reach out across the miles and millennia and actually make contact with them and get to see this stuff up close and personal. And that is just a priceless experience. And I hope you'll all come and see these things up close and personal when they're reinstalled. I'd also like to acknowledge that the land that this museum sits on, as with all Philadelphia, is part of the cultural stewardship of the Lenape peoples. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. And thank you for listening. So does you have a question?
Wait for the mic. In doing all of this, did you discover anything rare or unique about some of the artifacts that we didn't even know?
Yes, we're still making those discoveries. One of the things that was really interesting, I hope all of you had a chance to see the Lower Egyptian Gallery at one time, but it had this very dramatic uplighting. which was gorgeous, but you really couldn't see the artifacts. And the whole time we were working down there, we kept seeing, every time we moved a light, it's like, oh, look at that, that's so cool. We spent all our time. So there were there's a lot of graffiti on them, which we will be, on the Merumtab Palace pieces, which we will be documenting. With the Buddhist murals, the detail that you just never got to see was unbelievable. Like, this is actually a belt buckle on one of the figures. And just to be able to see that detail is incredible. Now, we did also have some less than thrilling discoveries. We took down one false wall that had the Egyptian stelas embedded in it and found a mummified school lunch, sandwich still wrapped in tinfoil, and a juice box, which looked like it had been there since 1950. On the column capital, the one that's shaped like a trumpet, there was not one, but two tasty cake blueberry pies, a box of marbles. Under the Sphinx, there was a thing of chewing tobacco, and a lot of girly magazines stuffed in places that you wouldn't expect. So also, I mean, the one thing that we find we're always really interested in is a lot of times newspapers get used on things, and we always check the dates. So, and even when we can't find the dates, you know, if men's shoes are 45 cents, it gives you an idea of approximately when it was in. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you take it to be your mission to maintain or preserve the million objects in perpetuity? Or do you recognize that maybe fabric or wood or paper, maybe 500 years is as long as you really expect it to last?
Nothing lasts forever. Whenever I give lectures about conservation for our students and stuff like that, right up there, I always have to say that there will come a time when none of these objects will exist. My idea is to push it back as far as I possibly can. But entropy is always going to win in the end. And we're just trying to bust it as far as we can.
That's bad. I remember last year, during the Chinese New Year celebration, there was this vote thing about the artifacts and act. It was near where the gift shop used to be. Did that have any effect on this?
No, that's a construction thing that they put up, and they're actually doing major construction behind that barrier. It's still there. We had to move some artifacts that were in that area and get them done. But we work really closely with the construction company and make sure that we know what they're planning every time, all the time. Is that it?
But I'm talking there was a vote. Did that I'm saying
Vote?
The vote on there was a vote. Favorite artifact, you would put a coin.
Oh.
Does that have any
Yeah.
Does that one.
I think
Does it have any effect on it? Does it would be?
We do tally up. It's sort of a way. At one point, we tried to do a thing where you could adopt an artifact, okay? And this goes back to the list of the objects that were most in need of conservation. And so we listed some of those objects. And then we had all this sort of internal angst about people are not going to get to take the artifact home, so can we really say adopt an artifact? And if they give us money, do we, and it's enough to do 2 hours of conservation, do we have to do 2 hours of conservation? So in the end, it just sort of, I believe, went away unless it's still there.
It's still there. It's used towards the annual fund, so it
Yeah.
goes through
Yeah.
many projects here.
Thanks, Tina.
Is there any role for 3D printing in the kind of work you do?
Actually, great question. I talked about the scanning that we did. Now, I didn't go into as much detail on this as I could have. The pylons, the big rectangular things in Lower Egypt, most people who looked at them probably didn't realize that 2/3 of the face of one of them is plaster reproduction. It was very well done, plaster reproduction. It was done in 1926 by a real artist. And he was able to do it because the two scenes are mirror images of each other. So he essentially just mirrored what he was saying. I believe that there was some issue where he actually put the cartouches backwards too, and that was a problem. But in any event, so our choices as conservators would be to remove all that and just leave what's there, or replace it with something a little more stable. It actually made it through the rigging process a lot better than I was afraid it was going to, but we were prepared for most of that plaster to be lost. Also, as an archaeological museum, we really try not to have a lot of deceptive restoration on our artifacts. But in this case, we know that the carving was there. We have pictures of it on site. And this is one of the things about working with our scholars is, for a while, we were looking at the pictures of these objects on site in Egypt and looking at what we had in front of us, and we're going, they sent us a completely different pylon. It's not the same piece of stone. Then our researcher went into the archives and read the excavator's notebook. And what happened is they were uncovered in 1915, dug out of the soil, left exposed for 4 years. And the Nile inundated the site every year for 4 years. So they were sitting with their feet in water, evaporating, and the excavator actually says the whole front fell off. So, plus, they had this 92-year history of people seeing them like that. But I'm not a plaster artist, and we don't really, in this day and age, have the time to do that level of artistry for something that isn't real. So we scanned everything. We scanned it at less than 1 millimeter accuracy. And our plan is to print it out in a stable material and use that to restore those areas.
And it won't weigh 5,000 pounds.
And it won't weigh 5,000 pounds. So.
We're going here first and then I'll come back.
Thank you. Hi. I'm a graduate of the Wharton School, so this is going to be more financial than anything else. But I'm just wondering, how do you ensure the off-site removal of these priceless artifacts? And how much of a budget does it take?
How do we ensure?
Ensure, yes.
Yeah. We don't ever talk about how much things are worth. However, we work very closely with the university's risk management department, the Office of Public Safety, and a whole range of other people. And that's why I said it was in an undisclosed location, and you'll never see a picture of the outside of the building. So a big part of it is by not letting people know where we are. But also we have state-of-the-art security in that space. And actually right now I could use my phone and look and see if there's anybody there right now, real time. So, but by and large, our insurance is covered under the university's fine arts policy.
With a project of this scale, have you looked at, how did you, I guess, plan it all out? What is comparable kind of restoration process that you had some kind of base for how to start this and what to do? Any other museums
They don't
who've gone
teach
through?
this in conservation school.
Yeah.
They don't teach this anywhere. I've sort of, by being here 30 years, have worked up to it with smaller scale things. And also, I rely a lot on other expertise. We consult a lot of other people and get ideas. And in fact, in September, I got a frantic email from a colleague at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston saying, they just told us we have to move our entire Egyptian gallery in 18 months, and we hear that you can do it. How do we do this? So they came down, and I sent them a whole document of what we'd done and how the whole process that we went through. And just like that, a lot of my colleagues have been really generous in sharing their ideas with me. I think we get time for one more question.
With all the artifacts the university has I thought about repatriating any of this? Since it's moved anyway, it's out of the gallery.
These materials were excavated legally by the museum and exported under permit through the museum. There are other things in our institution that other ideas may come up. In fact, the last in the Greats lectures, the Great Stuff lecture, is Takufu Zubari talking about, what's the title? But it involves the decolonization of museums. Whose stuff is it anyway? Thank you. Where he's going to be talking about that and the whole idea of, encyclopedic museums. And as somebody who grew up in a small town in Canada, without a chance to travel for a very long time, encyclopedic museums are magic storehouses for me. And I just love that, as I say, I can reach out and touch people from all over the world just by their artifacts. But that's not always an idea that's shared everywhere. And it's something that museums are doing a lot of soul searching about these days. And that's all I can say without Steve jumping in.